Where'd he go? Well, we'll just pretend it's this one. We're back now for part 2 of the disappearing 4-patch. Now, this is an example of this disappearing 4-patch pattern. As you can see, it looks quite complicated, but in reality, it's very, very simple. The last video, part 1, talked about fabric choices and pairings and the strip sizes and ironing techniques and all that good stuff. So if you haven't seen that, I suggest you watch part 1 so you have a little bit of an idea what we're talking about. But even a beginner, a first-time beginner can make this. In fact, I made this several years ago as one of the first quilts I ever made. And it's not perfect, but, you know, it looks pretty good. And, you know, you wouldn't expect a beginner really to make something that looks this complicated. And that's because it really isn't. Let's talk again about combining the strips, just to quickly review. So you had the strips cut in 5.5, 4.5, 3.5, 2.5, and 1.5 widths. Okay? If you haven't seen that, go back to part 1 and take a look at those sections. What you do is you combine alternating strips, styles, or colors, or tones, values, however you want to do it. So here I've got a solid and a print. And so I'm going to put my solid with my print. So I have a 5.5 inch strip here of the solid and a 1.5 inch strip of the print. You could have two different fabrics that are solids with differing values, like a dark and a light, or a black and a white. That's sort of what I did with the example. If they're too similar, if you end up with a bunch of medium value prints or solids, it's not going to look very interesting. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I think we're all sort of drawn to these medium value colors and prints and all of that good stuff. If you have trouble with that, there is a technique to help yourself out in determining value, and it's a little trick you can do with your phone. I'll put a link to a very short video that I've made showing how to assess the value of your fabrics, and it can be a surprise when you think, oh, this is quite a medium shade or value or a dark value fabric, and it turns out that it isn't. This is an improvisational technique. Yes, you can plan it out, you can write it out, and have everything laid out exactly how you want it to go, but I think, to me, that takes a little bit of the fun out of it. I'll have some plan going, I might even write some notes down, but generally, I'll just kind of go with the flow as it works. All right, so you've got your 5.5, 4.5, 3, 2, and 1.5 inch strips cut from both fabrics. And obviously they pair up like so. 5.5 and a 1.5, 4.5 and a 2.5. The two 3.5s. Very simple, very simple. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew these long strips together, straight line sewing, until we have something that looks like this. I've already sewn a strip. Get out of the way. And I like to stack mine sort of like this, so I can just go through the stack and I know what the sizes are without it taking up too much room. Until you have something that looks like this. So here is the 1.5 sewn to a 5.5. And after it's sewn, it makes a roughly 6.5 inch strip. You're going to do that for all of your strips. You're going to combine them all together. Now, what I also like to do is throw in something kind of funky every once in a while, an odd color, an accent color, something that's going to stand out. This works really well with a 1.5 inch strip, but it doesn't have to be. It can be one of the wider strips if you want it to be. And solids work well for this. Something that's maybe complementary to like this green, you know, a yellow, an orange. It could be a blue. You could draw a color from the pattern of fabric that you're using. This fabric has little bits of red in these peacock feather motifs. It could be even the gray, but I like something that stands out, right? So like a yellow, a complementary color, a little tiny accent color from your patterned fabric so that it's seen once it's all put together. But don't overload it with your accent color, otherwise it won't have that kind of effect. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit when we get to laying out our design. But for now, it would be a good idea for you to decide on an accent color to match up with either your print or one of your solids. In this example, you can see my accent color was the red, and it was actually a very similar pattern, you know, from the same manufacturing line as this black print. And then on the back, the backing fabric, I used the sort of opposite print. But you see, it's not a whole lot, and I did use it for the binding as well because it sort of framed it nicely, but I really only had one, if you can see, 1, 2, that's actually a separate block, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and really, actually only 2 strips. This was probably a 3, or I mean a 2.5, 2.5, and 1.5, right? So not too much. So if I'm going to use my yellow here with, where'd it go? Well, we'll just pretend it's this one. If I'm going to use my yellow here in lieu of the green, that's cool, right? But we don't want to use as much of this accent as we're using with all of the other paired up strips. Okay, now I had all of these so nicely ironed, and now I'm wrinkling them all back up again. That's all right. So also one tip about all of this, if you don't have space like this to sort of leave things out, there are a couple of methods to organizing your fabric. And I've also made a video about that, organizing fabric as you're working on it, organizing fabric to store later is some really good little techniques. Even if you're low on space, if you're sewing at the dining table or in a sunroom like I am, then there's still ways to keep yourself organized. And if you stay organized, then you're more likely to finish those UFOs and works in progress. Okay? We're going to sew our strips together, 5.5 with the 1.5, 4.5 with the 2.5, 3.5 with the 3.5, 2.5 with the 4.5, and the 1.5 with the 5.5. Sounds crazy, but it's a lot easier actually to do it and see it than to say it. Okay, so once you've done all of that, then we will look at how we're going to then slice up these sewn strips into, you guessed it, the same kind of 5.5, 4.5, 3, 2, and 1, and then we start playing with the design. We now have our sewn strip with the 1.5 inch of the solid and the 5.5 inch of the print. Now, what's really important here is you need the mirror opposite of these two fabrics. So you need next the 1.5 inch of the print, which I have here, with the 5.5 inch of the solid, which I have over here in my little pile, right? So that when these two get sewn together, they'll be 6.5 inches, just like this one, but they will be the sort of mirror opposite of each other, right? Now, you could also do this in a slightly different color if you want, and if you have the fabric. I've done one here, which is in the next couple of steps, in a different shade of green. This fabric has a couple of different colors in it, right? So we have a little bit of red, we have gray, we have light green, we have like a teal green, we have dark green, almost black. So if you want, you can use, in addition to your sort of main solid or your main color scheme, you can throw in a strip or two of a coordinating. Now I call it coordinating and not accent, right? Because this is obviously vastly different color, tone, all of that good stuff from these. But just don't go overboard with it, right? This is meant to be improvisational and fun, but within a sort of framework of parameters, okay? That's what I tell my writing students. I'm a university composition rhetoric instructor in addition to all of this. And I give them a framework to work within, but then they need to be creative within, those guidelines. So what can happen is if you pick a color like this that's different from your sort of main solid color, that's fine, that's cool, but you can end up overwhelming and diluting your main solid color. Back to this, we've got our mirror image here. I'm going to sew these two together. We're going to sew them together, right sides together. Don't forget, if you're using a print, make sure you put that right side down on the sort of right side of your solid. And again, I don't pin, I don't clip or anything, but you feel free to do that if you need to, okay? I find with just straight sewing these, strips, this fabric's not heavy, it's enough for me to handle it. And honestly, if there's a mistake or it gets a little off kilter, who cares? Life's not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. That's how they'll know that it was handmade. You'll notice I'm not using the controller foot. This is a standing sewing table that I made with my mom several years ago. So I can just sort of turn around and not get up, down, out of a chair. I'm also kind of tall. I'm 6'1", and all of the sewing furniture is too short for me. Ergonomically, getting stuff at elbow height is not easy. Automatic thread cutter, praise the Lord. All right, so now we have the mirror image of our first strip sewn with our nice little 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've got my strip sewn, and I wanted to mention something really quickly about ironing this. It can be a little difficult when you're trying to press toward this solid, when you've got this itty bitty little strip going on here, to get it, to open up right. So what I do is I iron it first from the other side so that I can sort of pull it, towards myself. Whatever works for you, but don't do like what I just did and pull it too hard. Just so that I can, get that to lay flat so that I can then go in and more or less get that seam open, okay? Because you want that flatness. That's what's going to give you the accuracy in your piecing when the time comes. You might not think it, but if you pull that or iron that without that seam being open, you know, that adds up. Even if it's like a 1/16 of an inch, well, you do that, you know, however so many times, and then you end up being a 1/2 inch off somewhere. Your quilt's not square, you know, or it's really not square. So just a little tip, if you're ironing like a little strip to a big strip, do it from the opposite side first, and then you can more easily open it up. We now have our 2 mirror image strips. Let me put it this way so that it looks a little bit better. Right? Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut this into 5.5, 4.5, 3.5, 2.5, and 1.5 inch widths along the way. Okay. So I already did this one, and I need to do this one. So I'm going to finish ironing this, and then we'll slice this one up too. Where the hell is my ruler? Oh, the ruler's green, and this is green. Once you sort of get the hang of it, and then there's so many variations of what you can do with this design. 1.5. Two and a half. 3.5. I really like this because, you know, it looks a little fancier than what it is, and it gives you the opportunity to, you know, make it up as you go. Decide on things how you want it to be at that time. Of course, you can plan it out however much you want as well. Creativity within boundary of parameters. Speak softly and carry a big stick. All right. So now we have those cut, and flip them back around. And where were my other little pre-cuts? There they are. And here was the first strip. So we're going to line these up so you can see what's going on here. All right, so the top is the 1.5 inch strip of the print. The bottom is the 1.5 inch strip of the solid. And now all you're going to do is pair them up so that you have 5 6.5 inch blocks, right? So this one is going to go with this one down here, right? This one is going to go with this one down here. This one will go with this one. There are the 2 3s. This one with this one, and this one with this one. You see how nice that is? Okay, then you get to sew all these together, right? You can chain piece it, you can, you know, connect them together. It's not hard. Again, it's just a straight stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance. What you're going to discover is once these are put together, that you can design in such a way that your squares start to sort of disappear. You could put your big sections of print together sort of like this. You know, when it starts to get put together, and it's just so interesting what results from it. Hello. Right? Is that right? Yes. And so you see how that can sort of end up coming together, and then you can, when it's all put together, no one will know how it went together. It's like I tell my writing students, it will be read from beginning to end, but no one will know if you wrote it from beginning to end, right? So no one will really be able to see how it was actually pieced together, and how it's designed, that's up to you, right? So we're gonna sew our little strips, little blocks together, I should say, and then we can see how they might get joined up.
Gives us hope.